It's about time where I share all of my thoughts on Illuvium Private Beta 4. What do I think about it? Do I think it's any good? Do I think it's going to get mainstream adoption one day? I'm going to answer all of that here, but today I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to make my face cam a little bit smaller so that you can barely see me. Thank God for that. And I'm going to make the Illuvium gameplay large and just have that running in the background while I just go through and process my thoughts. Also, I normally script it out a bit better. I have a lot of talking points, all the different things I want to hit and things like that. But I've left this one a bit more fluid. I just want to see how I do it off the cuff so that it comes off a bit more authentic. It comes a bit more honest and true. And it's just what I'm thinking at the time. Honestly, the reason this comes about is because I've seen many people actually do videos like this for other things and other games and stuff like that. And I always find them really interesting and I love listening to them. I'm not saying that you will enjoy listening to me. Actually, it might be the opposite. And if you don't enjoy this video, then please let me know so that I know what I can work on or if I just need to scrap this idea altogether. But I thought this could be good because I've been here for a long time. I've seen all the iterations and I've played a lot of different crypto games at this point. And so I don't see why I shouldn't be weighing in on my number one favorite game, which is Illuvium. So let's jump into it. The first thing here is obvious. Illuvium Private Beta 4 is simply, I'm just double checking the sound's working, is simply better than Private Beta 3 or Beta 3 or whatever you want to call it. It's just a lot better. I don't know exactly how to explain it. The Illuvials roaming around in the overworld are the obvious big winner, but there are a lot of other things that they've changed that I'll talk about a little bit later in this video. But basically, it feels better overall, and I can't quite put my finger on it, it's still not quite right. I dare even say it's still not good enough to become the best crypto game of all time. Thankfully, it's headed in the right direction. Every single upgrade they've made to the game has been a winner. It's been a major improvement from what's come before. The same thing went for PB3 compared to PB2, and PB2 compared to survival mode, which was PB1. Every single time they've improved. There hasn't been a single time where they've added in a new feature and it was worse than what came before it. For example, they added in alluvial hunting. That was not better than the floating around wake thing. They updated the auto battler. They did not make it worse in any way, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean that alluvial hunting is the best thing ever. It doesn't mean it's your Elden Ring of crypto gaming. It's not the greatest experience that everyone is going to have ever. It's a big improvement. It's a lot of fun. But it's not quite there yet. And I want to talk a bit about that sort of subject as I go through this today. So, one of the big changes they did that I actually really liked was they updated the pathing in all the regions. This is most noticeable in Abyssal Basin and Crimson Waste. In Abyssal, they removed all of the toxic stuff on the ground, all that sort of stuff. And in Crimson Waste, it's a little bit less like a maze. You still get a bit lost in there, but for the most part, it makes a lot more sense. It's a lot easier to analyze it as you go through. And a lot of the outskirt areas are much nicer as well. But maybe that's just the addition of the alluvials. I'm not entirely sure. Brightland Steps, I played the least, and they've updated it a little bit, but it's mostly the same. That being said, overall, the art, the pathing and the level design, a big step in the right direction. It's actually one of my favorite updates, and I hope they don't focus on it too much. I don't know how their team split up, but I hope they get us those new regions as soon as possible. That's what I'm looking forward to most when it comes to the new regions. But these upgrades for level design, an absolute great win. I'm loving it. So the next thing I should talk about is the alluvial hunting. As an initial version, it's fantastic. I'm not going to lie. It is a lot of fun and it gets you addicted for the first 10 hours or so you play, which is really solid. Like every single alluvial, you jump in, you try and catch them. It's super exciting. You chase them down, you shoot them all the weapons and how they interact with the drone abilities, all massive big wins and big upgrades to be added to the game. However, it's not quite a game yet. It's a little bit more like a mini game than an actual addition to the game. If we use Pal World as an interesting example, some pals group up in clusters, some pals run away from you, and some pals are really tough. That being said, even in Power World, they're all quite predictable, and that's my problem here. Every Illuvial, I know that's because it's a beta, it's an initial iteration. Every Illuvial essentially acts the same as every other Illuvial, which kills the immersion a little bit and makes it less interesting. It, as I'm going to talk about later, it kills some of the overall replayability of Illuvium as a whole, which hurts the Illuvium overworld since it's the core and the heart and soul of the Illuvium universe. And so this as a feature, it's great and a big upgrade from before, but it's still got a long way to go until it is the feature it needs to be to drag in mass adoption for Illuvium. But as I said before, this is better than the system before, and the next system will be better than this one. And that's all that really matters at the end of the day. You can only develop something so fast, and Illuvium is doing an excellent job, especially in the past 6 to 12 months. They've been moving at speeds we have not seen from them since the very, very start of the project. Honestly, that makes me very excited for the future Illuvium, but I'm just wording out my criticisms and kind of my concerns for the game in this video. Maybe the team will see it and it will help them improve the game in those ways if they're not already doing so. And maybe the community will see it and they'll also help put in their feedback of things they agree with or maybe ways that they disagree. All of this helps improve the game and get us to where we need to be. The next thing I should talk about is the new mining and harvesting systems in the game. Basically, now you pretty much shoot everything you want to mine or harvest, rocks, plants, whatever it is. Like before, big upgrade from what we had previously, which was stop, click, 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 and then you're done. It wasn't very fun. It's a lot more fun now. I enjoy it, although again, quite repetitive. You kind of do the same thing over and over. Really, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense sometimes. What's stopping you from jumping to the overworld and saying, Mozart, fly over to that vicinity in the region and mine all of the resources around there while I go hunt over here? There are so many ways to enhance this overall gameplay that doesn't require you to shoot every little thing you see. And maybe some of the UI treatment stuff about how much energy it's going to cost you to do so, what sort of stuff you're going to get out of it. Obviously, I love my data, but something's not quite feeling right. And maybe that's because after the 100th rock, it starts to get a little bit repetitive. After the 100th morphopod, it gets really repetitive. It's like, these things are slowing me down and annoying me, but at what point are they actually not adding anything to the game? The morphopods that attack you, sure, but again, they don't actually add anything to the game. They just kind of appear and shoot at you, which is great in terms of keeping you engaged and focused, but it's not actually a gameplay mechanic. What might be more interesting is if you look on your map or you look through your heat map, you can see that there's a morphopod off in the distance that's headed towards you. It gives you time to prepare and take it out before it interrupts you when you're chasing an alluvial. Or maybe you can see that there's an outbreak of morphopods and like 10 spawn in this area. You can shoot them all at once. Or maybe they disperse and you're going to try and chase them down if you want to get that resource. There's a lot of different ways that you can make this feel like a living and breathing ecosystem. And right now it just feels like kind of like a bunch of assets with some AI that haven't really created yet thrown into them. Fantastic. But it's got a long way to go, and I'm really looking forward to when they make those improvements. But for now, things like the morphopods feel a little bit out of place, if nothing else. That's just my thoughts on it. The other thing is the slow, grindy element. Now, Illuvium's clearly meant to be somewhat of a grindy game. Honestly, I don't really have any issue with that. My problem is actually the progression involved. In a typical grindy game, you tend to get something every single time you play around. If we use something like Genshin Imp, no, that's a bad example. Haven't really played Genshin Impact. I can't think of a good example. If we think of something like, I was going to say Elden Ring, which would be even dumb. All right, I'm just going to use Guild of Guardians. If we think of something like Guild of Guardian, you'll jump into adventure mode and you'll go through and you do all this stuff, you beat all these enemies, and then at the end of it, you get a bunch of rewards. You get some crystals, which you might be able to use to buy some summoning stones to help you summon new characters, or you might get a bunch of gear that you can enhance and create gear from. to add a bunch of gear to your things. It always feels like you came out of it with something substantial. And you somewhat do that with alluvials in this game, but once you've caught all the stage 1 alluvials, that stops as well. There's no more progression in the game. You need to feel like every single time you go into the game or go into a run, you came out with something that you wanted to come out with. Right now, it feels like 3 runs later and you might get that one tiny thing or that one tiny stepping stone, which is simply not enough. A good example for this would be maybe you go in and you capture that cooker. Maybe it's so easy for you to capture the 3 cookers to fuse, you come out with a cookerless. You can only do that so many times until you need to do like 5 runs in a row to get a cooker raft. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't be grindy at all, but you need to get things along the way, and right now I don't feel like you're doing that. Stuff either needs to become a little bit easier, or you need to add more stuff to the end of the track. Here's a good example. I thought of one. Here's a good one. In Fortnite, when you have the Battle Pass. Battle Pass is very popular right now. It's easy to see why. They're an insane dopamine rush. I've been playing this game on my phone called Star Wars Arena of Titans, or I don't know, the little shooter one. It's like a team brawler thing. Anyways, every single time you finish a game, you pretty much unlocked one of the free slots on the Battle Pass. Makes you want to keep playing more games because every time you finish, you unlock something new on the Battle Pass. You get the same thing and same feeling from League of Legends where you finish a game and you increase your rank. It's one of those things where Illuvium doesn't have that yet. You don't get something. Now, sure, you capture Illuvial, but if you've already got 10 Archies, capturing an Archie isn't acquiring something. Another good example is Pokemon cards. When you open a pack of cards, you get the 5 common cards you probably don't have. It's very exciting for the first few packs you get, which is similar to Illuvium. But then eventually you've got all the common cards, and so those are all useless in the pack. However, there's always that rare card at the back. And it always feels like 9 times out of 10, that's a card you didn't have yet. Sometimes it's the one you already had, and that's fine. Or maybe it's a hollow version of it. But it always feels like it's a card you didn't have yet, and you can add it to your collection. And so it doesn't feel like a waste of time you buying that pack, or not a complete waste of time at least. That's what Illuvium needs to take it to the next level. And I hope that they do that for open beta, because it's going to make a huge difference. I cannot stress that enough. The next thing we should talk about is the shard changes. Now, they break when they fail, and I've been quite outspoken about me not loving the new changes. I don't mind that they break. My problem is that the resplendent shards feel very lackluster. Let's put it that way. About a 20% chance for a resplendent shard to capture a Ramphie, and you typically won't get more than 2 or 3 capture attempts, and resplendent shards are hard enough to find, which means it's a really rough experience. Without master shards, this game would be almost unplayable. Well, unplayable is a strong word, but you have no idea how bad this all might feel. Now, I don't mind the shards being bad for the tier up. Maybe you risk an epic shard, which is a tier 4 shard, on a Ramphie, and you've got like a 10% chance. That's a really cool experience. But if you spent all the time and effort to find a resplendent shard, it shouldn't be 20%. It should be closer to 40 or 50, or should it ramp up over time, or you get something if you miss the capture. You need something off the back of this. It just feels too bad right now. That's all I have to say on that. Oh, sorry. So the next thing, and this kind of goes into what I've been speaking about already, the EXP gain is simply too slow. Now, a lot of the things I've talked about today, the team are already working on. Some of them haven't really heard about anything, but this one's a big one. They're going to improve the rate at which you gain EXP, and you're going to gain it in the other games in the Illuvium universe as well. All very, very exciting stuff. But it needs to be a lot better. And this might go into some of that progression thing, where you enter an overworld run, and maybe you don't capture your next Ramfire or whatever, but you leveled up your Chukundi like 5 levels, and now you're able to fuse it. You need to be able to level things up quickly. It doesn't even matter if you increase the caps. For example, I think it's, let's say 3 level 10 Atlases will evolve into an Axon. Okay. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Let's say it's 3 level 10 Atlas. Now, sure, that's great and all, but what if it was 3 level 50 Atlas, and pretty much every run you finish, it's leveled up like 3 or 4 times? It even though the speed of progression is actually almost the same, it feels like you're making a lot more progress because you're seeing the numbers increase really, really fast, which also gets more exciting when it comes to Leviathan and things like that. It's things like this that the team currently hasn't added to the game that make a world of difference and make it feel a lot faster than it actually is, which removes some of the overly grindy sense of things. And you'll notice this in a lot of the games you play every single day. This is very common, like I said with the Battle Pass analogy before. So one of the other things I want to talk about is that in the game, I do really enjoy it. I really love it, and I can see myself getting addicted to it even as it is. But something is missing, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I've got 3 things that I think might be it. The first one is there's not enough alluvials. This thing needs to be populated with it, especially as they come in herds. Maybe monkeys like to travel in packs of 2, and chukundis are always in high locations. There's no life to it, and there's not enough alluvials in the game. Maybe you have like 90% of the alluvials on Brightline Steps be Archie, and then there's the occasional like Arcos and stuff walking around. I don't care. It just needs to be more. It needs to feel like this is inhabited by some sort of creature. It doesn't quite feel like that yet, but it's not that far off. It's not too bad. The other thing is the environments don't change enough with each encounter. Now, this is a lot harder to implement, a lot harder to improve, but day-night cycles would, for start, be a huge upgrade, and maybe this impacts the sorts of alluvials that spawn. I know this happens in Pokemon where you can only find Leddybar at night, for example, and Noctowl, and there's certain Pokemon you can only find during the day, things like Beautifly maybe, I'm not sure. But night and day cycles would be a big thing. Weather cycles would be really cool. Like if it's raining in Crimson Waste, then you're going to see more Atlas running around. That would be super awesome. But more importantly, maybe in Crimson Waste, a certain passage is blocked when you enter on that day. There's some rocks in the way. Or there's a flood in Abyssal Basin, and so now the water level's a lot higher than it was. There's so much you can do to add to the replayability of the game, and these are a lot smaller than things you can do with the alluvials. But a night and day cycle in particular would make a world of difference. And as we go to 7 regions, you can essentially turn that into 14. You add a snow cycle for all of them, and you essentially go to 28. Then you add rain, and you go to 56. And then you add this sandstorm maybe, and you go to 102. Like, really think about it. You can add so many different variations to these regions that every single time you enter one, you're in a different location. You can turn 7 regions into 100 locations by adding a lot of minor nuances, major alluvial herd events, increased hollow chances. I don't know. You do what you want, but you need to improve the replayability of Illuvium. It's just not quite there yet. It's doing really well, and it's way better than PB3. But there's still a lot more work to do, and I'm looking forward to. I think 2025 will be the year of Illuvium. I think by 2025, a lot of this sort of stuff will be polished and clean, and we'll have things like a day-night cycle, and it will make such a big difference. You guys are going to come back to this video and say, Scoriox, those are some interesting points you said, and I wasn't sure if I was on board with them, but I get what you're saying now. And maybe I'm wrong. That's also quite possible. So the last thing on this is that right now, Illuvium has no major wow moment. Now, Hollows could change that. That could make a big improvement, sure. Although I'm not convinced. What I mean by a wow moment is like when a new boss appears in Elden Ring, that's like, oh my god, how am I going to fight this thing? Or when you find the secret pipe on the 2nd level of Mario, you're like, ooh, where am I going now? What's going to happen next? Or when you fight the box legendary in Pokemon, you're like, crap, do I have the right team to be able to capture this? How many Ultra Balls is this going to take me? There's a question, there's a strategy, there's what am I going to do next? And in Illuvium, you don't really have that. It's, I need to get this drone equipment, so I need to go shoot a bunch of rocks. That's not a what do I do next moment. That's not a something happens and it changes and stops everything. Now, we do have a little bit of that. When you find a Monarch or a Ramfire and a Fisto in the overworld, you're like, holy shit, I got to make sure to hunt this properly. However, the hunting is a little bit too basic. Now, it's hard for a lot of people, and so obviously we can't necessarily make it harder, but you can make it more of a spectacle. And on that note, I think overworld combat, which is coming next month or July or whatever it might be, overworld combat can do all this. if it's handled really well, I think it really can. You find the Mephisto and you're like, okay, I've got my team ready. I'm ready to fight this thing. You jump into a live action combat battle. Maybe it's somewhat easy, but it takes you a little while to do. And the strategy you use in the battle improves your capture chances. In Power Word, it's like, how many Power Spheres can I throw before this thing knocks me out and I drop all my shit on the ground, right? It's really that sort of element. And I think once we have those sorts of mechanics in there, you will get that fight a boss in Elden Ring sort of mentality and experience. We need that in Illuvium really badly, and I think that's coming. I'm very excited for that, because that's going to make a world of difference. The way we view the Illuvials in the overworld, and the way we interact with them in all parts of the Illuvium universe. It's gonna broaden the game quite a bit. So the next thing I want to talk about just quickly on the back here is what I'm excited for the future. I know this video was fairly critical and I had a lot of things I'd like to see change or improve or get better over time. But I really do love the game. It's come a long way and I still believe it's the best crypto game in the entire space. By far. But that doesn't mean it's the best game ever. And I'm hopeful for it to become the best game ever. I really believe it will become the best game ever. It's just not quite there yet. And I just like talking about that. I like being critical of these things. And it's interesting to me. And the team's done an excellent job. Art direction, everything fantastic. Everything's fantastic. There's just more to do. And honestly, that's kind of exciting in a lot of ways. We get to keep going. It's a never-ending story, never-ending journey. And that's awesome too. So what I'm excited for in the future, more Illuvials in the overworld. That has to happen ASAP. If they don't do that with open beta, I would be quite disappointed, to be honest. I think that's very achievable. How you balance it with which Illuvials are caught and when, and making things not too common or too rare, that's the hard part. I think adding them in there has to happen in one way or another. And the other thing is better progression systems. Like I said before, every single time you finish a battle, something has to level up. Even Pokemon did this really well. Like in your first few battles, your Pokemon are leveling up like a level every battle or two, and the battles are quite quick. And so leveling up and progress in Pokemon just feels really clean. It feels really balanced. Illuvium doesn't have that yet. And there are a lot of people that are going to pick up the game, play for a little bit, be like, shit, I'm going to do 5 more runs to evolve this Illuvial. And then they're just going to leave and they're never ever going to come back. And so it's very important to me that progression gets nailed down. Now, it's no easy feat. Progression is probably one of the hardest things to nail in any game, or a game of this type at least. And so it's a challenge. But I think that's what these testing phases are for. And I'm glad we've all had the chance to go through them, talk to the team, give them feedback, and give them feedback with our actions as well. They're seeing what we're doing. They're seeing that no one's probably fusing Illuvials like ever. And they're just capturing everything they can because it makes the most sense for the way the game is currently set up, which is not a very balanced overall system. So I hope you guys like this video. I hope it wasn't too boring or too dull, or I didn't drone on for too long. If you like this sort of content, please leave a like and leave a comment down below letting me know what you like the most. And please give me your thoughts as well. What do you want to see improved the most with updates to the Illuvium overworld?